This is the first time that we've tried to actually bring so many different groups together, so I hope this works. And I'm going to be asking a lot of questions today because that's the style of my presentation. So those questions will probably be aimed more at the people here in this room, but in the alternate sites, if you folks have a comment or a response to a question, I'd be honored to have you jump on and put that across, and we'll try to pick up those responses too. Okay, so I'm a dairy guy. I've been involved in it my entire life. I grew up on a dairy farm. I did academia in food and dairy for a few years. Then I came out here to Idaho and got involved with the dairy industry. I did that for about 20 years. And now I'm working dairy promotion here with the Dairy West group. And that's an honor for me to have been in this industry for my life. I've spent my life studying milk and trying to understand what it is and what it does. And we're only now just starting to really scratch the surface of it, even though we've had so many years. So I've got plenty of job stability. I continue to try to learn about what's in there. And as we look not only at cows but other species milk, there's so much that we can pick up and glean because it's evolved to the point that the milk from different species, and we're going to talk quite a bit about that today, is so directed to what the needs of that particular species are. So we're going to hit on some of that today. But I'm going to be talking to you today about sugar. How many of you like sugar? I kind of like sugar, you know. And I think one of the things that, because from a nutritional perspective, don't we all say, well, we have too much sugar in our diet? Do you guys probably preach that, right? Many of you are dietitians, so I know that you're preaching that to the choir out there, or maybe not to the choir. And so as we talk about sugar, what I'm going to be saying today, though, is that, you know, I've had people say to me, I want to be on a sugar-free diet, and your response to that would be?
You're crazy. Yeah. Good luck. It's like sugar. Yeah, good luck with that.
Good luck with that.
Added sugar, or natural sugar versus sugar, maybe.
Well, we'll get into all that too, and you guys can help me talk about it. But I mean, we have to try to ameliorate the sugar intake that we have in our society with sort of what's needed. And I want to talk about what's needed today because we wouldn't want to go to zero sugar. That wouldn't be good. Our metabolism is set up to derive a significant amount of energy from carbohydrate and from sugar. So I'm going to be talking about sugar today. But before I do, I need to ask this question. I want you guys to imagine an organism. This is a really unique organism because it's just moved from a highly protected environment into a place that's harsh, just like a real challenge to even to survive, okay? And on top of that, it has a bunch of other requirements. It's got to grow, an absolute requirement to grow. It's got to double and then triple its weight in a very short period of time, this organism. Secondly, this organism doesn't have a whole lot of cognitive function established yet. It's got to get it quick. Thirdly, this organism doesn't have much of an immune function. A little, but not much. And to survive in this harsh environment, it's got to get immunity really, really fast. Okay? And this organism doesn't have a functioning gut. Obviously, I'm talking about a mammal here. It's got to have a functioning gut, and it doesn't have it. Okay? So how's it going to get all of this stuff's got to happen in a very, very short period of time? How's it going to get it? You guys know what I'm talking about here? I'm talking about an infant. On top of all those requirements I just gave you, there's one other very limiting factor, and that is that we have only single source nutrition for the infant. It's only going to get one source of nutrition, which is weird, like when you think about from a dietetics perspective. That's very sort of strange, but that's the way it is. So that single source of nutrition has to give all of that to this infant. So here's our living organism. And of course, I'm representing a human infant here. And so the human infant is born where does it get its immunity? It's already had a few immunoglobulins because the human placenta allows passage of immunoglobulins. What about bovine?
No.
The bovine placenta blocks completely. So the bovine infant has 0 immunoglobulins in its system, unlike humans. But the humans need to get more, and where do they get it? Yeah, what about the cognitive function? That requires some nutritive elements. What about all the growth? Bone health? It's got to grow its bones, it's got to grow its tissues, it's got to grow its muscles. All that stuff has to be in this single source of nutrition. That's the miracle that we call milk, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? That's an absolute miracle when you think about it. Today, however, I want to talk specifically about what's going on in the gut and the microbiome. Now, what's the microbiome? When I say microbiome, does that mean anything to anybody? What does that mean to you?
Bacteria that's in your gut.
That's the bacteria that develops inside your gut. Now, today, us sitting here, we have, think about this, we have more bacterial cells residing in our gut than all the rest of the cells in our body. There's something like 10 to the 12th bacterial cells residing in the gut. And that plays a major role in what we get to do in our lives. Most of our immune function comes from the gut. We're saying that it's the body's immune organ. And then what's the other thing? We talk about the gut-brain axis now as a big kind of a thing, that what goes on mentally is tied to what goes on in the gut as well. So we need to focus on how does this microbiome in the gut develop. So let's keep our mind on this human infant now, born, doesn't have much in there. How does it get it? How does it get those bacteria that are required for its survival rapidly to colonize the gut? Any ideas how that happens? Birth is part of it. You know, in preparation for this, I ran across some really interesting stuff on comparing natural births to C-section births. And the colonic bacteria are very different at first. Now, the C-section infants can catch up and they can get there, but it takes some time. Something about the natural vaginal birth introduces organisms to the infant that they don't get otherwise. That's fascinating to me. And then, of course, we have the breastfeeding that takes place. In milk, there are a lot of factors that help to select what's going to go on in that gut of that infant. Here's a big point, and I'm going to show this slide to you twice today. Carbohydrates are what provide the energy source for these colonic microbes. It's carbohydrate. That's how they get their energy. That's how they grow. That's how they divide. So we have to talk about carbohydrates today, which are sugars and other carbohydrates. So first, some carbohydrate chemistry. I don't really hate to do this to you. And I was going to say I don't normally do a lot of chemistry, but that's actually not true. But I'm going to give you a little bit of chemistry today. Now, you've all had, if you're a dietitian, you've had chemistry. Anybody here never had chemistry? Anybody out there never had chemistry? I don't see any hands, so okay, we're going to do it. I have two molecules here. And if you look at this structure right here, what does that make you think of? Just that one ring. Who said that? Glucose. Jacqueline would be correct. That's glucose. And so that's one. And here's another one. And see this little N right here? What does that mean?
Nitrogen?
No, that just means there's a whole bunch of them connected in one big long chain. In fact, I want you to think about a molecule that has glucose, just like that, connected together 1,000 units long. Now, what am I talking about? I heard a whisper.
Starch.
I'm talking about starch, right? But guess what? Here's a second molecule that has glucose, 1,000 units long, and it's not starch. Anybody know what this one is? There's a very slight difference that's hugely significant to us between these two molecules. Well, what's this one? 1,000 molecules of glucose connected together, but it's not starch.
Is it lactose? Are we?
Lactose will be a disaccharide. It only has 2 units.
Okay.
I'm talking about a big molecule. Lactose is a little one.
You're talking about glycogen in our bodies?
Glycogen? That's a good guess. Glycogen actually is a lot of sugar units all put together, but the thing about glycogen is it's highly branched. It's not a linear chain. It's got all these 1/6 linkages and branches out, so it's kind of more this way rather than this way. It's not a linear molecule. But that's a good guess.
You've got water in the middle, don't you? H2O?
You're getting deeper in the chemistry on me than I want to go. But yes.
I'm scared to guess what it is.
Let me give you a couple of hints. This molecule on the bottom contains more than 50% of the organic carbon that exists on our planet. This is a major, in terms of content in the biosphere, it's one of the biggest content molecules we have. I said it has to have organic carbon in it. You guys are on to water today. Maybe I need to do a water presentation. No, this is a molecule. Milk has lots of molecules in it. It's like starch but different. Hemoglobin's a protein. So you're taking me far away. Okay, you branch guys out there, anybody recognize this molecule?
Fiber. Oh, what'd you say?
Whoa, what'd you say?
A cellulose and a fiber, yes.
Sweet, we got cellulose and fiber. That's exactly what this is. This is cellulose. So you got starch and you got cellulose. And they're both 1,000 molecules of glucose sugars all connected together. So why is it, now here's a good question for all of our dietitians. Why is it that we can have starch, we digest it all day long, right? It feeds sugar into the blood. We eat potatoes, we eat corn, we eat anything wheat-based bread, we get that starch, we digest it, we get energy from it. But what about cellulose? And do we derive any energy from cellulose? None. And all that sugar sitting in it. Why can't we get to it? Okay, these are two very similar molecules, and one we digest and get energy, and the other one we cannot.
Fiber?
It's because it's a fiber, but what makes it unique? This is a chemistry question, so.
It's bound. It's the way the molecule, so.
It's the way it's connected. Okay, see this connection right here? This is glucose, this is glucose. This is the connection from one to the other, but look at this connection. It's a little different. Right? Okay, you chemists. Help me here. There's a name for these linkages. Well, that's good, but not quite right. Okay, guys out there, what are these two linkages? They're two different linkages. Come on. Okay, so somebody over here's got the chemistry. Who is that? I'm getting out of your range, Greg. Who over there's giving me the chemistry? All right, that's awesome. Alpha and beta. So which one's alpha and which one's beta? Okay, I want you guys to think now about when you eat starch, already in your saliva you have an enzyme that starts to break it down. And what's it called? But before the amylase, there's another part.
Lipase.
It's called alpha amylase, which means that it can break this alpha linkage. This is where the enzyme cuts it, right between there. And guess what? This one's called beta. And is there such thing as a beta amylase? Not in humans. Doesn't exist. And so we eat cellulose, and what does it do? Does it go to the stomach? Yes. Does it go into the intestine? Yes. And then what happens to it?
Right back out.
It goes to the colon and exits. Fecally, removed in the excrement, and you don't have any energy value from it. Now notice I said energy value because there is other value from fiber, right? We all know that. But we get no energy. Now there are mammals that can get energy from cellulose, and this is a critical thing that a lot of people don't get, because people come to me all the time and they say, well, you've got animals out here eating food that humans should be eating. We don't need those animals. We should be eating that food. And is that true? How much of a corn plant can a human eat?
Just the point.
Just the kernel.
Just the kernels. Well, what about the leaves? Can we eat it?
Sure.
Steve, can we eat it?
Yeah, you can eat it.
We can eat a leaf. It won't kill us.
You eat salad.
But guess what? If that's our diet, pretty soon what will happen to us? If that's my diet, what will happen to me pretty soon?
You can't absorb the energy, so you'll die.
I'll be dead. That's what will happen. No, seriously. If I try to live on eating corn plant, I'll be dead because I can't get at this. I can't get the energy from it. But there are animals that can. And this is the point, that grass, corn, all these kind of plants that we cannot digest and get energy from, we got animals that can. So don't forget that very, very important part. It's kind of a sideline of my presentation, but it's a big piece because people don't get that. They think that cows and sheep and whatever else are eating food that we can eat, and that is not true. They are able to convert something we cannot utilize into high quality food. Now we go to the sugar of interest today. Oh, I got to back up. This is a beta linkage and this is an alpha linkage. Now I've already said cellulose is indigestible. And you guys already knew that. It just took some pulling to get you to say it. If it's indigestible, what about other beta-linked sugars? There are a lot of beta-linked sugars and carbohydrates out there. And can we digest them? Any of them?
Need an enzyme.
Yep. That's why the cows can eat this, because they have bacteria in the rumen that produce enzymes that break this down. But we don't have a rumen. We're a monogastric. We're kind of like pigs. Omnivore, monogastric omnivore. That's what humans are. But we can't do it. Can we digest any beta-linked sugar? That's the question. Only the one. There's one beta-linked sugar that humans can digest, and that's only partially. And some of us not very well at all, right? And that's lactose. So look at this linkage. It even says beta. You see this little beta right there? Lactose is a galactose and a glucose, and it's a beta-linked sugar. It's the only one we can digest. Now, why in the world would we have a beta-linked sugar as a primary carbohydrate in milk? The single source of nutrition for our infants. Why? Does that make sense? To put a sugar in there that's like difficult for us to get at?
Must provide something real amazing.
And in fact, it does. There's a big reason why it's there. I want you guys to be thinking about why it's there. Because it's not by happenstance that the only beta-linked sugar that humans can digest is found in milk. It's the only one. Now here is cow's milk composition. Now what do you see in there? Well, water, obviously, because it's got to be liquid in order for the infant to like get it. It's got to be, the liquid delivery is much simpler for an infant. They don't have teeth or anything yet. So it's got to be liquid delivery. And that's true for bovine too, Steve. So milk has to pack a lot of nutrients and still deliver it in a liquid. Now think about something like celery. What's the moisture content in celery? It's like 93 or 4%. Watermelon is 97%. Carrots, tomatoes, any peas, any vegetable you want to pick has more water than milk. And milk is still a liquid. That's another miracle of milk, that it can pack all this nutrient in here and still maintain its liquid state. You know what we do with milk? We put it in a membrane system and we start to take water out. And we can take a lot of water out of milk and even get the solids content up to 30%, even 40% solids, and guess what? It's still liquid-like. I can still pump it. That's weird. That's a miracle. Look at the sugar in here, 4.8. Now, would you say that's high or low as mammalian species go? 4.8% lactose. Is that high or is that low for mammalian species? Or in the middle? I got Jacqueline saying it's in the middle. How many of you agree? Is it in the middle? You guys are all disagreeing. There's no hands going up.
I say low.
Okay, I got a low over here with Melinda. How many think it's low? Okay, a few hands.
I'm with you, Lauren.
How many of you think that it's high? Well, you guys aren't voting.
I know.
You got nobody's voting. All right. Maybe that's not fair to make you vote. This is actually fairly high because we have, but not the highest. We have animals like, particularly sea mammals, sea lions and dolphins and those kind of animals have almost no lactose in their milk. And guess what's really high in their milk? What would you expect? Fat. And the fat in those milks is up around 25 to 30% of the milk. I mean, it's loaded with fat, and it's still liquid. Don't forget that part. But the highest lactose in any species, what would you suspect that would be? If you think about all the different species that produce milk, which one has the very highest amount of lactose in it?
Camels.
Can't. Now, who said humans? You would be right. So what was cows?
4.8.
And this is 7.1. Now, the number 2 producing guess what number 2 is?
Monkeys?
Yeah, that's close. Chimpanzees produce 7% and humans produce 7.1. So primates, for whatever reason, got to have a lot of sugar going in, lactose. Now, what's the prevalent thing that we do with dairy products today with regard to lactose? We take it out. You see these lactose-free products all over the place? And yet for infants, It's an absolute requirement for humans to get not only lactose, but the most of any species, a huge chunk of lactose going in. Why?
To feed that bacteria.
You guys are jumping way ahead of me now. Here's some species I just put up here for you to compare. Lactose contents. Here's our cow. Here's our goat. Do people drink goat milk? Sure do. A little lower than a cow. Sheep and cow are the same. Why would you think that would be? They're very close to each other, right? They're ruminants. They're quite close to each other. Here's human. Here's a horse. Horse pretty high. Pig. Rabbit. I didn't put the sea mammals on here, but they're almost zero, like 0.1% or something. It's really low. Did you see this before? Because I got to hammer this home. Carbohydrates are the source of energy for the colonic bacteria. So let's talk about what carbohydrates could be going into the system to feed these bacteria. What are all the different sugars that you guys know of? We've talked about glucose already. What else do we have? Fructose. Galactose. Sucrose. And sucrose is a disaccharide comprised of glucose and fructose. Thank you.
It's coming back. It's coming back.
Now, if we talk about lactose from humans, I have to ask this question. In the infant, is it fully digested? What do you think? It's a beta-linked sugar. Difficult for humans to digest. Is it going to be fully digested by the infant? I got yes and I got no. I'm not going to force you to vote. But the answer is no. This is not fully digested. Even infants have what's the name of the enzyme?
Lactase.
Thank you very much. We also call it beta-galactosidase. Okay? Lactase more officially is beta-galactosidase. Beta-galactosidase. One way to tell if the infant can digest lactose or not is to test its breath hydrogen. Now, why would that be? If we do not digest lactose, and I think I got this on the next slide, that undigested lactose passes on into the colon, where bacteria that exist there, or bacteria that get selected there, use it to grow. They use it for energy. And that lactose gets converted into some other compounds, typically an organic acid like lactic acid, and carbon dioxide, a gas, which is why we sometimes have discomfort, and methane and hydrogen. And that hydrogen gets absorbed from the colon in the bloodstream, and you start to breathe it out. So what you do is get a baseline of hydrogen in the breath, and then you give lactose or a lactose-containing product to someone. If that hydrogen increases significantly, you know that wasn't digested. Because if it's broken apart by lactase and the galactose and the glucose come absorbed into the blood, then it's not going to produce hydrogen in the colon. Okay? Well, hydrogen breath testing will tell us whether infants are actually digesting or no. And guess what? Hydrogen breath testing in infants shows that lactose is fermented in the colon and they produce hydrogen gas. I've given you references here. On all this stuff that I'm trying to really lock down for you, I'm putting a scientific reference for you. Now, how much? Well, data shows that's about 35, and I picked a conservative number because there was some research suggesting it's more than that, 40%, but 35% of the lactose that's consumed by the infant passes to the colon undigested. This is a critical point, ladies and gentlemen, because the presence of lactose in the colon does something for the infant. Now, I already asked these questions here, but I'm asking it again for you to reconsider. Okay, here we have all these sugars that Jacqueline was throwing out. These are the possible carbohydrate sources for bacteria. And in fact, when how many of you studied microbiology? Okay, so when a microbiologist has an organism and they don't know what it is, what's the first thing they do? What's the first thing you do? Look at it under a microscope? Okay. What's the second thing you do? Yeah, that's probably the first thing they do. What's the second thing they do? They'll run a panel of tests to see which of these sugars it can grow on, because that helps us identify. Every bacteria has certain sugars it utilizes and certain ones that it doesn't. And so we can figure out, and so they run these panels, these sugar panels, with the bug and find out what it can utilize. Well, glucose and fructose enter right into the glycolytic pathway to produce lactic acid. And the organism generates ATP, which is, that's cellular energy. Thank you. Lactose is here, sucrose, maltose, and bacteria are no different than us. They're trying to get energy out of this. Most bacteria, in fact, I would say virtually every bacteria on this planet can utilize glucose. So why wouldn't glucose be the one that's in milk? Why would we have evolved to not have glucose as the primary sugar?
Wouldn't make it to the colon.
It won't get to the colon, first of all, and if it does, what will happen to it? Now keep in mind, we're talking about an infant that doesn't have the right bugs in there yet, and if you're flowing glucose, what's going to happen?
Bad bacteria?
You have a possibility for some bacteria you don't want colonizing the gut, right? Because every bug can utilize glucose. So lactose is exclusive to the mammalian infant. Now the question is, what bacteria need to colonize in the gut? I pulled this list for you guys. Now this is lactobacillus, a rod-shaped bacteria. Guess what it does? It ferments lactose, along with all the other bacteria that are dominant gut bacteria. All of them can ferment lactose. Okay? Now, converse, and why is that? These are unique bacteria, because most bacteria, they're just like us. They have a hard time breaking beta-linked sugars. And lactose is, remember, a beta-linked sugar. So we've got, I just put a few on here. We've got pathogens cannot ferment lactose. Now what did you notice? Did you see this on the previous slide? Okay, Clostridia species, you need some of those in your gut. But this one, what's this one? That's botulinum. That's botulism. That's one you don't want. And guess what? Unlike some of the rest of its fellow members of its community, the Clostridial species, it cannot ferment lactose. And neither can these others. Interesting, isn't it? So now let's talk about the weaning period. Now this is critical for us, because all the time people say to me, milk is for the infant. Once we wean, we shouldn't ever eat it again. I'm going to put a serious question mark over that statement with you today. Okay, and there's a reason for that. Now, when a child gets sick, so okay, as we transition to solid food, now what becomes its primary carbohydrate? Okay, they're eating more grain. They're eating, what do we start with typically as we transition off of milk into solid food? Cereals, rice, mainly, probably the starting. And then as they get a little older, we'll transition them onto some of the other grains. And then fruits, vegetables. The primary sugar now transitions. It isn't lactose anymore, is it? What is it?
Glucose.
It's now glucose as the primary sugar. But now the infant gets sick. The child, not the infant. The child gets sick. And what do? What do we do with our sick children? We take it to the doctor, and the doctor prescribes something. What is it mainly that the doctor prescribes for children when they're sick?
Antibiotics.
Say it loud.
Antibiotics.
Amoxicillin. It's like the #1 prescribed, not just for children either, for adults too. We get an antibiotic prescribed. What does that do to us?
Kills the gut.
CDC 2015 data, 788 antibiotic prescriptions per 1,000 people younger than 19 years of age. And guess what? It's even a little bit higher in older people. That means most of us, once a year, are taking a course of antibiotic, whether we're a child or an adult. Does that ring true to you? That's what the CDC. What's the CDC? That's Center for Disease Control. So I pulled this slide off their website, and it's kind of interesting when you look at, here's the community antibiotic prescriptions per 1,000 population. So this isn't higher because some states have more people. This is on a per 1,000 people basis. And some states, man, look at the South, man, they're pounding out antibiotics down there. I don't know why that is, but that's what the map shows. 270 million antibiotic prescriptions every year. And we take that, and as you've already stated, it does something to our gut bacteria. So when we start coming off an antibiotic treatment, when you have a 1-year-old child that's been weaned and is coming off an antibiotic treatment, now what do we use to try to help put selective pressure on the gut to recolonize? Do we?
We should.
That's what my parents used. My kids would better. Crazy.
Yeah, we should be thinking about yogurt.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, and what's the main sugar there then? Because it's starch mainly now, which is glucose. So if we take our children off, or even ourselves, if we take ourselves off an antibiotic treatment and we're eating kind of more normal foods, solid foods, we don't have the selective pressure on our gut. Now the CDC is trying to reduce antibiotic resistance. I searched all over their website. I don't find anything about the destruction of gut microflora and the ramifications of that for increased disease, but there are absolute ramifications of that because the gut is the body's immune organ. The gut is the body's immune organ. So there's all kinds of diseases that get affected when we don't have the proper microbiome in there. So how do we reestablish this? Now, beta-linked sugars are all of them indigestible to us except for lactose. Now I want to look at some additional sugars because I'm going to transition now into another part of my... Do you guys have any questions for me at this stage? Any questions?
No, Eric, it's Christy.
Yeah,
I have
Christy.
one. You mentioned that there's a lot of lactose-free products on the market and that they just remove the lactose. Can you tell me, are they adding lactase to break up the disaccharide mostly, or are they actually removing?
Mostly what they do is they add exogenous lactase to the product, which breaks the lactose up, and then what do you have?
Glucose and the lactose.
That's correct. And what does that do then? Does that give you selective pressure on your gut?
No.
No.
Okay.
See the problem?
Yeah.
Eric, I have a comment.
Comment.
Can you just put that slide up there, I just pulled up the CDC obesity slides, and it can almost overlay exactly on top of the antibiotic, which means to me that,
Oh, on the map?
yeah.
Okay, that's it. That's an interesting. Let me go back to that.
Because obesity, they're getting more, yeah, it's almost the same.
The obesity rates are highest down here, isn't it?
Right, exactly. It's
So you're saying those people have a tendency to
be sicker.
and get more,
Which is exactly the opposite of what they need. It's fascinating.
and then they're also more prone to have gut problems, which can lead partly to diabetes and other chronic diseases. When you start thinking about Crohn's disease, irritable bowel disease, and linkages of those to things like diabetes, I mean, it all comes into play.
Eric, one of the questions from the football's office, is there a dose amount of lactose that is ideal?
The dose amount of lactose that's ideal for an infant, we know, because nature selected it. But what about for us as humans, as adults? That's an important question that we don't have a good answer for because nobody wants to do that piece of research. We're moving away from lactose in adults. We're moving lactose free, see? Okay, I got to get back to where I was. Oh, I didn't want to jump yet. I want to talk to you guys about some other indigestible sugars and carbohydrates. And I want to talk a little bit about lactose intolerance with you for the rest of the period today. What's my time?
Yeah, 23 minutes.
Okay. We have, well, let me back up. I have friends. And they say to me, I'm lactose intolerant. Okay? And they won't touch a drop of dairy, no milk, no nothing. Well, they might eat a piece of cheese now and again. That's about it. But those same friends of mine have no problem. I've gone to Mexican restaurants with them. Okay? And half the plate is refried beans. And they're knocking it down. And one thing I know for certain is that 100% of us are 100% intolerant to this sugar, which is in beans. Okay, this is raffinose. There are two others, stachyose and verbiscose. And they're very similar to this one. They just keep adding more galactose on. One more galactose, you get stachyose. Two more galactose, you get verbiscose. We can't digest these sugars. No human. Okay, 100% intolerance to this. And so that's not a partial digestion, it's zero digestion, and all of that comes, and how much of it is in a bean? It's about 5% of the bean. How much lactose is there in milk? Cow's milk? See where I'm getting at here? So my friends that are lactose intolerant, they eat this and no problem. Ladies and gentlemen, sugar intolerance is sugar intolerance. If you don't digest it, the bacteria will. And they produce the same compounds, acid and gases, from this. Now how many here have eaten refried beans in the last month? 2? Are you serious? How many of you have eaten refried beans or any kind of beans in the last month? Now we're getting more honest. Okay, if you can digest beans and live with the sugar intolerance of a bean, why can't you deal with the sugar intolerance of milk? They're all indigestible sugars are found not only in beans, but broccoli, cauliflower, those kind of vegetables, Brussels sprouts, it's loaded in there. Humans are 100% intolerant. And we eat that stuff all the time, we don't worry about it. So why do we have this big thing about lactose? 35% of lactose in the infant is not digested but passes to the colon. Most of us, as well, when we consume lactose, only have a part of it digested. Even if I'm lactose tolerant, thank heavens, because I eat lots. My brother-in-law came to our house. He opened the fridge. He said, "Good grief, this looks like the dairy case over at the store." Because there's all kinds of cheeses, cottage cheese, yogurts are in there, milk and everything. So I'm consuming a lot of dairy. It's a good thing. But I'm lactose tolerant. But still, I don't digest all that lactose. Some of it goes down into the colon. That's a good thing, ladies and gentlemen. We want some undigested lactose to go to the colon. That puts selective pressure on the bacteria down there. That's why. That's a big, big point. And so when people say I'm lactose intolerant, I'm not going to take any lactose, and they've just come off an antibiotic course, I kind of have a problem with that. That's not healthy for them. They ought to be transitioning to a higher lactose diet to get some selective pressure back in there. Now this is what you see all over the place, this. Okay? I just went out on the internet and there's all kinds of pictures about this. Type in lactose intolerance. Here's your normal lactose digestion. You have the enzyme, you get glucose and galactose. Exactly what you just said. And here's a lactose intolerant. They don't have the enzyme, so that goes to bacterial fermentation. They get acid and gas and irritation. What nobody is saying, though, is that these bacteria in the gut that get exposed to the lactose, they either can utilize it or they can't. And the ones that can't are the ones we don't want in there. We want to get rid of them. Nobody says that out here.
Eric, can I ask you a question about that? Because I deal with this with my husband all the time. So when he eats cheese and all that, it doesn't bother him. But when he drinks milk, it bothers his gut. And it creates a problem, a very big problem. Why is that? What is that makeup in the milk dynamic versus some of the other products?
With milk, there's more than one thing that can go on. A lot of people that are lactose intolerant actually aren't. But they have a sensitivity to some of the proteins that are in cow's milk. And I suspect that's Tim's issue.
So is the new A2 milk that we keep hearing about?
That's not going to make a difference.
So it's a protein problem versus a...
I think it's a protein sensitivity to some of those bovine proteins.
So what's the difference in cheese, though? It still has the proteins.
But those are broken down
Right.
in cheese. Because there's been a significant breakdown of those proteins in the cheese matrix.
Is that the same reason, we work with a lot of people who they can't do milk, but they can do yogurt? Because it's been...
Well, yogurt is better than milk when it comes to lactose intolerance, because the bacteria that they use to make the yogurt produce beta-galactosidase. They produce lactase themselves. And so you get that benefit. But keep in mind that in yogurt, there's plenty of lactose there. There's like 3.5% lactose in a yogurt.
The lactose content of cheese is quite a bit lower. Than
Almost zero. In hard cheese, it's almost zero.
Right.
But a lot of lactose intolerant people still think they shouldn't eat cheese.
Right.
But it could be either one. It could be the lactose or it could be the protein. You can't, because they're
only-
both different.
The only way to know for sure is to do an oral lactose tolerance test. So you give the lactose in isolation away from the rest of the system. Then you can tell what's going on. Now, evidence of changes in lactose tolerance. So I went back in the literature, and nobody's done anything very recently on this, but I found this stuff fairly old. So if you look at the years on this thing, it's like 1973, 1979. Ethiopian children. They gave them milk over 4 weeks, and guess what they found? Lactose symptoms from lactose, because Ethiopians are lactose intolerant, right? African people. Over 4 weeks, their symptoms declined significantly. They don't know why. It's a kind of almost an anecdotal report in the literature. The same thing in Iranian children. Also significant lactose intolerance in that group of people. Initial symptoms improved during continued milk ingestion. Why would that be? Now, as I studied for this particular presentation, I had to change my mind about something because I used to think that lactase, the enzyme, was an inducible enzyme. That by taking a little bit of lactose in, you could actually turn it back on, but that is not true, I found out. We don't turn it on. So what's going on here?
Is the microbiome changing over time?
I'm going to give you what I think is a landmark piece of research, and I'm going to give you the details of this particular study. Dennis Saviano, some of you may know Dennis. He's at Purdue University. He was the dean over there for quite a while, but he spent his life working on lactose maldigestion. And Steve Hertzler, they recruited lactose maldigesters using hydrogen breath tests it works in children, it works in adults just as well. And Dennis used to be my office partner. He was two doors down from me when I was in the University of Minnesota. So I got to know him really well. You know what he told me? He said, when I'm recruiting for these studies, and he recruits by hydrogen breath testing after an oral dose of lactose, 80% of the people that come in saying they're lactose intolerant actually aren't. They can't pass a hydrogen breath test with me. So I can't put them on the study. So he's looking for a baseline, and when they take the sugar, over a few hours, the hydrogen bumps up to by about 20 parts per million. That's how he does it. So he challenges them with a dose of about 0.7 grams per kg body weight. And how much sugar is that? So I calculated it for me. So for me, that'd be about 53 grams of lactose that I would take. That's a pretty good sized chunk. Now don't you guys be getting your calculators out and back calculating my weight. Okay? 50 plus grams of lactose is a lot. And if you aren't tolerant, you'll easily bump up by 20 parts per million hydrogen in your breath. This is how he selects people for the study. Now, what did he do? He took a group of people, he gave them a lactose, this exact challenge. This is a lactose challenge, okay? He gave them this challenge at time 0. Then he gave them a 16-day course of dextrose. What's dextrose? It's sugar. But what kind? Anybody know? It's a little different than table sugar. Table sugar has fructose in it. Table sugar is glucose and fructose, the sucrose. This dextrose only has glucose. Okay? So he gave him dextrose for 16 days. Then he gave him another lactose challenge. What would you expect comparing this one to this one? No change. Then he gave him lactose for 16 days and gave him another lactose challenge. Then he went back to dextrose and gave him another lactose challenge. And here's the challenge, monitored hourly for 8 hours. And by the way, during this period of eating these sugars, he's increasing the dose by 0.2 grams per kilogram body weight per day. So they start out at 0.3, and then he takes them up to 1 gram. So by the end, they're getting, this is a load of lactose, if they're on the lactose. Okay? So do you understand the study? So they're getting glucose, and he's measuring before and after what's their lactose tolerance like. And then he gives them lactose for 16 days, increasing the dose. What's their lactose tolerance like at the end of that? And you know what he found? This is the sum of breath hydrogen concentrations over the 8 hours. So he just took all the 8-hour period, added it all up, and after dextrose, guess what? They still have a high hydrogen breath. What does that mean? Not being digested well at all. These are people that are maldigesters, okay? But after the lactose feeding, look at that. It's dropped from 600 down to like 200. Now, it's a pretty big error bar, but still. So what's the point with this research? This isn't lactase inducement. This is an adjustment of the colonic bacteria. There's still lactose intolerance in here. They still have breath hydrogen that's increased, above the 20 ppm over baseline, but it's way less. And so what Dennis told me is that he can give 10 to 12 grams of lactose, not 50, 10 to 12 grams of lactose to a lactose maldigester, and they handle it pretty well. How much lactose is in 1 cup of milk? Somebody whispered it. 12 grams. So if you're lactose intolerant and you want to take control of what's going on inside your gut and put selective pressure, you can start low. Maybe start with a half a cup. And gradually over time you can ramp it up, and you will have an adjustment of your colonic bacteria because the lactose is doing its job in putting selective pressure on there. This is the evidence of selective pressure. Now, Dennis didn't say that because he was thinking about it from a different perspective, but I'm saying it. This is evidence of selective pressure on the colonic bacteria in the gut. They start to adjust to it. Here's a review article on lactose as a potential prebiotic. Okay? And I'm saying it's even more than that. It is the sugar that nature selected to install the appropriate bacteria in your gut. So why wouldn't you want to keep it going as you move out of being an infant stage and other stages of your life? I'm ending up with a few pictures. This is Fairlife. Now look what it says right down here. Can you guys read that? Barely? Because it's very light. It says lactose free. Now these guys claim that they have reduced sugar compared to other milks, and they do, because guess what they did? They took milk and they ultra-filtered it, and they took about half the sugar out. So this, Christy, isn't just lactase being added. This is actual removal of sugar, and then they're adding lactase behind it. So it's got about half the sugar of normal milk, and then it's hydrolyzed. They make a big marketing spiel about that this thing is lactose free. I said to my friend Shaquille, he's their R&D guy over at Fairlife. I said, Shaquille, I like your product. I like that it's got more protein, but I don't like it. He says, why don't you like it? I said, you don't have any lactose in there. Because I made a decision for myself a long time ago that I'm going to keep lactose going all the time in me. And this doesn't do it. This doesn't give it to me. Now what about this thing? First of all, the protein's 1 gram compared to 8. Okay, so keep that in mind. But what about the sugar? It says it has 13 grams of sugar in there. But what kind? We got to ask this question when we see sugar on the label. What kind of sugar? This is critical. This it has almond milk, filtered water, almonds, and then cane sugar. What's cane sugar? That's sucrose. That's just a fancy name for sugar. This isn't going to get it. Every bacteria on the planet, once the sucrase has done its job, and what's sucrase? That's the one that cuts it and gives you the galactose and the glucose. Every bug on the planet's going to ferment this stuff. This is not what you want, especially after you've been on an antibiotic course. Now there's a whole nother piece about the protein, and I just wanted to flash this up. This is a piece of research I did at Glambia with my colleagues. And what we did is we took sugar, oral glucose tolerance test, 50 grams of sugar, and measure what happens to sugar coming into the blood. And then we started to layer on top of it protein, dairy protein. So more and more and more protein. Now look what happens. Here's the glucose control, the highest one up here. And as we add more protein, 5, 10, 20 grams of protein, along with the 50 grams of sugar, this is the appearance of glucose in the blood. It's coming down, down, down. So when you take an almond milk, and it's giving you all that sugar, and only 1 gram of protein, you're not going to get this benefit. You're going to have a significant sugar hit. Where with milk, it's going to be depressed because of the protein that's there. So here's a 2% reduced fat milk. 12 grams of sugar, that's lactose. That's not added sugar. That's what I'm looking for. And I hope it's what you are all looking for as well after this discussion today. Hold it up. That's the one.
I have two.
Questions?
So with certain antibiotics, they prescribe that you not take them with dairy products when you're doing the course of an antibiotic.
Yep.
So
I-
is the rationale that in order for the antibiotic to do its job, it can't have the barrier, if you will, of lactose for absorption?
I came home from Ireland and I got pneumonia on that trip. It hit me like a ton of bricks the very next morning after I got home. The sickest I've ever been in my life. And of course, they gave me a potent, it wasn't amoxicillin. They gave me a potent antibiotic for that thing. And they told me don't take dairy with this. What do you think I did? Yeah, I kept the lactose going in spite of what they told me. Because I asked the doctor and he didn't have a good answer for me why. I'm sure that somebody knows an answer, but I don't have a good answer for that. I've never been able to figure that out. Why, in the course of an antibiotic, they're telling you don't take dairy. I ignored it.
You're still alive?
You're still here.
I got over that pneumonia, and that was a good thing. Other questions? Questions out at the alternate sites? Christy? April? Okay. Oh, there you guys are. All of a sudden the image went over to you. Okay. Thank you.
Questions about dairy. This is your guy, so now's the time to ask.
Questions?
I'll just throw this out here, because it's one of those controversial things you hear people say, that, you know, humans are the only adult mammals that drink milk, and we drink milk from a different animal. How do you...
Why is it that we are the only mammalian species that drinks another species' milk?
We have the ability to farm it.
Why is that? No, my response to that is,
What's your response?
my response to that is, why are we the only mammals that clear large tracts of land and put seeds in the ground to grow plants that we also, seriously, if we want to be like other mammals, then what do we have to do? We can't live an urban lifestyle. We're going to get out in the forest and start foraging. That's what they do. That's what all other mammals do. We're different in lots of ways.
We drive cars.
We build buildings. We do all kinds of stuff that other mammals do not do, including drinking other species' milk.
That's how I answer it. And adult cats will drink milk if you give it to them.
Hey, cats are supposed to be intolerant, but I can tell you, growing up on a dairy farm, we had loads of barnyard cats, and guess what they got every day? And you know what? They didn't run from it.
They're good masters.
They lapped that up like no other. I didn't notice any kind of intolerance in those cats.
Even kittens.
Well, kittens are going to have it, right? Because they're infants.
No, but yeah, and we used to give it, we'd warm it up for them and give it to them. If their mama died, if they were buying it.
My dogs, they all drink milk, all of them, their whole life.
You got a question?
Question?
And I just asked, so one time when someone, after an antibiotic, like, use the gut, let's use yogurt, probiotics. Really, I guess, comes to yogurt and milk, there's a lot more of lactose in milk, right?
Wow, I can hardly make out what, did you guys understand that question, anybody?
Kylie, speak up a little bit.
You're coming through real crackly, I can't hear.
I was just talking about after antibiotic dose, we talked about, yogurt is yogurt, which is part of the reason. But really, there's more lactose milk, so potentially there's more benefit with having milk on top of that.
Yeah, I suppose the thing though with yogurt is that not only do you have the lactose sugar, but there's also some of the bacteria. Remember I showed you lactobacilli, they're a critical component in the gut microflora. You get some of those when you take yogurt as well, especially if you focus on a probiotic type yogurt, which has like Lactobacillus casei, Lactobacillus acidophilus, and some of these. Those ones can help reestablish those good gut bacteria along with providing the fuel that they need, the lactose. So I think that's why people opt for yogurt over milk. But it's a valid point. There's more lactose in milk than yogurt, yes.
All right.
So go get your lactose, guys.
Drink up. We got ice cream, cheese, milk, yogurt. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you, everybody.